A parenting program is great, but you know what's better? Feeding your children. That's better. Paying your rent so that your children have a warm place to stay. That's better. Being able to buy clothes for your kids. That.
One minute.
And I'm the one that's obstructing us from doing good things. This body has made a choice to do nothing for needy families. And we have so much within our power to do, and we are actively not doing it. The schedule of the legislature is reflective of those values. The bills on the worksheet order are reflective of those values. And our budget, which is a moral document, will be reflective of those values. This body should take a hard look at what we're doing. It's never too late to change course. It's never too late to start helping those the most in need. We could start doing it today, and I would encourage this body to consider that. I am going to continue to spend time talking about TANF today. I think that it's an important
That's
issue.
your time, Senator.
Thank you.
And you're next in the queue, and that's your last time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, so I am going to continue talking about TANF today. I'm going to go to the interim hearing. There was an interim hearing held by HHS back in at the end of last year. Nebraska lawmakers question $131 million fund built with unused public assistance money. A state fund, this is in the Omaha World Herald, a state fund holding money intended to help Nebraska families in poverty topped $131 million this year. Despite claims by state officials that they had plans to use the money, Stephanie Beasley, Director of Children and Family Services for the Department of Health and Human Services, said the money represents the accumulation of unused portions of temporary assistance to needy families, federal block grant. The block grants provide public assistance to families and help pay for a number of programs. Beasley revealed the October 1 reserve total at a legislative hearing Friday, prompting frustration from a pair of Omaha lawmakers who said the state has not done enough to make use of the money. We have people who are hurting in our communities across the state, and we're sitting on $131 million, and that does not sit okay with me, said Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. We are in crisis. I've been saying we're in crisis for months now. She said HHS officials have told the committee several times before that they have a plan for using the reserve funds to help children and families, yet every time they come back, the reserve fund has grown instead. Senator John Arch of La Vista, the committee chairman, expressed similar concerns. He said the issue has been ongoing despite the department's past promises and lawmakers' past questioning. See, Senator Arch and Senator Cavanaugh on the same side of an issue. We just see an opportunity here, he said. We want to see those dollars well used and within the federal guidance. We have some opportunity to improve services and create some innovative services. Beasley said the department launched a work group in March to study, quote, study how more funds can be distributed in accordance with federal and state guidelines. End quote. The group, which includes people who have received TANF assistance, is working to assess needs in Nebraska communities, evaluate current programs, and recommend additional programs. So far, she said the group has identified family support coaching, emergency housing stability, and kinship child care assistance as priorities. The work group, sorry, it jumped around, so I lost my spot. The work group is expected to make its initial report in a couple of months. Beasley said the group is not looking at eligibility levels for families to get cash assistance, which she said is a legislative decision. It is a legislative decision. There are 3 bills around this sitting in HHS. This bill would be a very reasonable vehicle for any one of them. And we're already attaching 16 bills into this bill. What's a little cash assistance for the most needy in our state? Just something for people to think about. If we're looking to do something good for the people of Nebraska, LB 227 is actually an opportunity for us to attach TANF assistance, something that the department has specifically said we can only do. They can't do. We have to change the eligibility in order for people to get the cash assistance that they so desperately need. She noted that fewer families are qualifying for help, even though the number of Nebraska families with children in poverty has not shrunk. Meanwhile, average benefits were not keeping up with the cost of living. Average benefits are not keeping up with the cost of living. Guess what? We have a bill for that.
1 minute.
It's sitting in HHS, a bill that would have increased the amount of benefits to account for the cost of living because we have not increased the benefits in such a long time. Enough is enough, she said. People, oh, I don't know what this is. Okay. Meanwhile, the number of people qualifying has not shrunk. Meanwhile, average benefit levels were not keeping up with the cost of living even before the recent spikes in inflation. Enough is enough, she said. People need direct assistance so they can afford basic necessities, not a spectrum of new programs and initiatives. Concerns about the size and uses of TANF reserve have been raised for a number of years. In 2014, then State Auditor Mike Foley questioned the reserve, which was then $55.8 million. He said it could have been used to reduce the use of state tax dollars for assistance. We'll look at that.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you.
Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Hansen, you're recognized to close on floor amendment and waives. Members, the question is the adoption of floor amendment 43, the second division. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
31 ayes, no nays on adoption of FA 43.
FA 43 is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, next division, the third FA 44, the third division of AM 1332, containing sections 54 to 57, containing the contents of Legislative Bill 219.
Senator Hansen, you're recognized to open on the floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, this is a portion of the omnibus bill, LB 219, the Senator Eyeballs bill, requires DHHS to provide for rebasing inpatient interim per diem rates for critical access hospitals. DHHS shall rebase the rates every 2 years, and the most recent audited Medicare cost report shall be used as the basis for the rebasing process within 90 days after receiving the cost report. LB 219, as amended, was advanced to general file with a 7-0 vote. And that's pretty much what this section with the floor amendment is pertaining to. And with that, I will yield the rest of my time back to the chair.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Eyebaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just point out, as Senator Hansen just mentioned, that 219 is a bill which directs the Division of Medicaid and Long-Term Care to rebase those inpatient interim per diem rates, which have not been done for a while. And as I iterated before, we did meet with Chairman Bagley, or Director Bagley, and he agreed that they could do that within their department. It doesn't anticipate a fiscal note because rebasing simply just increases that per diem rate. So I appreciate Senator Hansen packaging this together. It's a very important bill for rural Nebraska and critical access hospitals. Thank you. I yield my time back.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was almost done with this article about the HHS committee hearing last year around TANF. Concerns, it's in the Omaha World Herald. Concerns about the size and uses of TANF reserve have been raised for a number of years. In 2014, then State Auditor Mike Foley questioned the reserve, which was then $55.8 million. He said it could have been used to reduce the use of the sales tax dollars for assistance. A legislative fiscal office report presented at the Friday hearing said that Nebraska has had a reserve fund since the federal government started the TANF block grant program in 1996 as part of welfare reform. The block grant program gave states flexibility in using the money as long as it went towards specified goals. These included helping needy families so children can remain in their homes, promoting job preparation, work and marriage, preventing out-of-wedlock pregnancies, and encouraging two-parent families. Clearly, the goals of the TANF program are dated. I've always been curious how the preventing out of wedlock pregnancies became a goal of a government program. Beasley said Nebraska uses 29% of its TANF funds for cash assistance and 16% for Employment First program, which aims to help parents move from cash assistance to work. Block grant funds also help pay for child welfare programs, child care subsidies, emergency assistance for families, a fatherhood initiative, and other programs. According to the fiscal office report, the TANF reserve built up largely because block grant amounts were based on the number of families getting public assistance in 1994, when caseloads were at an all-time high. About 15,000 Nebraska families were getting cash assistance that year. As of August, there were 2,787 families getting cash assistance. So I want to unpack that a little bit. There were 15,000 because of the eligibility. We have not changed the eligibility requirements since 1994. So cost of living has gone up, incomes have gone up. So with inflation, we are not accounting for that, which is why our numbers are going down. So 2,787 families in Nebraska are the same dollar amount cash poor as 15,000 families were in 1994. Not inflation accounted for, just dollars and cents cash poor. So we actively have not increased the eligibility to keep up with inflation, cost of living, et cetera. And our block grant has remained based on those numbers, which is in a lot of ways a gift to us as a state. The problem is, and I think it's by design, at least the last 8 years, it seemed to have been by design, to not fully spend the cash reserve so that the federal government eventually cuts our block grant. So for anyone, my dear colleague and fiscal hawk, Senator Reapy, anyone who believes as we do that we should be maximizing our federal dollars, this is a problem because it is by design to ensure that the federal government sends us fewer dollars. And we're still paying the same amount in federal taxes, but receiving less of that money back to our state. And that is problematic. And it should be problematic for this entire body. And I would like to think that this new administration cares about that in a different way than the previous administration does. I do believe, based on what I've been told by the governor, that he does believe that we should be maximizing federal programs and not trying to make sure that we are losing out on federal dollars, because when we lose out on federal dollars, it costs us more at a state level. So it would be great if we could find a way to attach one of the TANF bills or all of the TANF bills.
That's your time,
to this
Senator.
bill. Thank you.
And you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. So it would be great if we could find a way to attach the TANF bill to this bill or to another HHS bill. These are not controversial bills. They're not controversial at all. And we have the money. We have so much money that we could be giving to these families. So I'm not going to do it because, first of all, that would just tank it to begin with. but also I'm doing this. So maybe others can work with the committee chair and other members of the HHS committee to see if we can get TANF attached to this bill or another HHS bill. But we do have an opportunity, and it's a huge opportunity, and it should be a bipartisan effort to get TANF rainy day funds out the door to those most needy. That $130 million is just sitting there. And it could be doing so much good. And just think about it. Think about money in the pockets of the most needy in our rural communities that are struggling financially. If the people in the communities who are struggling financially get money, cash assistance to help them live, that's going to help those communities. That's going to help those communities. Just like increasing SNAP eligibility helps those communities. Food banks, food pantries are an amazing asset to this state, but they don't help economically address food insecurity. And they don't help financially the communities that the people live in. Because when people don't have money for food and they get food from a food pantry, all of that is insular within the nonprofit community. But when the state gives them SNAP benefits, that cash assistance goes into the grocery stores in our small communities. And that is an important thing that shouldn't be lost in the process of all of this. So back to this article about TANF. Oh, I think I have one more time. I think I'm on my second time right now. Is that correct, Mr. President? Yes, I'm seeing head nods. Yeah. Okay, one more time after this. Okay, so according to the Fiscal Office report, the TANF reserve built up largely because block grant amounts were based on the number of families getting public assistance in 1994, when caseloads were at an all-time high. About 15,000 Nebraska families were getting cash assistance that year. As of August, there were 2,787 families getting cash assistance. Beasley said Nebraska's low unemployment rates have reduced participation in the program. She said the number of families getting assistance this year is less than in 2021. And that is the end of that article. So I'm going to move on to the next. That was, okay. See, the article in the Nebraska Examiner has lots of links, which I very much appreciate, to other resources cited within this article. So one was that article about the hearing, and here is described by State Auditor Mike Foley. So this is the auditor's report from December 10th, 2014. It's to then CEO Carrie Winter. Another bipartisan
1 minute.
effort. Mr. Winter came and helped me a lot when I was working on the Special Investigative Committee into St. Francis Ministries. As a former CEO of DHHS, he was very knowledgeable on our child welfare system. Also, the fact that he was there during the initial privatization pilot. So, just thank you to Mr. Winter for that. I also like to point that out because I do think that we've lost sight a lot of bipartisan work and the importance and significance of it, and how we can accomplish really good things when we work together. So this is a letter from then Auditor Mike Foley. It's so funny to say then Auditor Mike Foley because Mike Foley is the auditor again. So current auditor and then auditor with a hiatus as Lieutenant Governor, Mike Foley. Dear Carrie, this letter is provided.
That's your time, Senator. You're next in the queue, and that's your last time on the floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, so this is a letter. This letter is provided pursuant to AICPA auditing standards. Don't know what those are. AU-C section 265.A17. It's always interesting. We always reference these kinds of things in official letters, like pursuant to whatever the FOIA. We call it FOIA. It's not actually FOIA in Nebraska, but everybody knows when you talk about FOIA, everybody knows that you mean a records request or public records request, open records request. And so we just say FOIA. But when you actually put it in an official letter to an entity, you don't write FOIA. You write pursuant to Nebraska statute, blah, 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 blah. And let me just tell you, if you write it wrong, they charge you $64,000. So, by the way, I'm still working on that records request, which I did get some information on Friday that I need to circle back to DHHS about. So that's the records request on the managed care organizations bid this last year. Our MCOs, managed care organizations that we're bidding. Anyways, I'll come back to that. Probably later today. I've got a few hours to kill. So this is to Dr. Is it Kerry Winter or doctor? I know he's an attorney. Anyways, Mr. Winter we'll go with. I apologize if you're a doctor. Annual financial report, CAFR, and statewide single, in parentheses, single audits. This communication is based on our audit procedures through October 20, 2024. Because we have not completed our audits for the fiscal year 14, CAFR, or single, additional matters may be identified and communicated in our final reports. In planning and performing our audits of the financial statements, we considered the state's internal control over financial reporting, parentheses, internal control, as a basis for designing audit procedures for the purpose of expressing our opinions on the fiscal statements of the state, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of the state's internal control. Accordingly, we do not express an opinion on the effectiveness of the state's internal control. Our consideration of internal control was for the limited purpose described in the preceding paragraph, and that was not designed to identify all deficiencies in internal control that might be material weakness or significant deficiencies, and therefore material weakness or significant deficiencies may exist that were not identified. However, as discussed below, we identified a certain deficiency in internal control that we considered to be a significant deficiency. We noted certain internal control or compliance matters related to the activities of the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services, DHHS, or other operational matters that are presented below for your consideration. The following comments and recommendations, which have been discussed with the appropriate members of DHHS and its management, are intended to improve internal control or result in the operating efficiencies. A deficiency in internal control exists when the design or operation of a control does not allow management or employees in the normal course of performing their assigned functions to prevent or detect and correct misstatements on a timely basis. A material weakness is a deficiency or a combination of deficiencies in internal control, such that there is reasonable possibility that a material misstatement of the entity's financial statements will not be prevented or detected and corrected on a timely basis. Thank you. We did not identify any deficiencies in internal control that we consider to be material weaknesses. A significant deficiency is a deficiency or combination of deficiencies in internal control that is less severe than a material weakness, yet important enough to merit attention by those charged with governance. We consider comment number 5, Tannish cash reserve funds, to be a significant deficiency. This comment will also be reported in the State of Nebraska's statewide single audit report, schedule of findings, and questioned costs. Draft copies of this letter were furnished to DHHS to provide management with an opportunity to review and respond to the comments and recommendations contained herein. All formal responses received have been incorporated into this letter. Responses have been objectively evaluated and recognized as appropriate in the letter. Responses that indicate corrective action have been taken.
Time,
Thank you, Mr. President.
There's no one in the queue, so I recognize Senator Hansen to close on FA 44. He waives. Members, the question is the adoption of the third Third Division, FA 44. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk, please record.
35 ayes, no nays on the FA 44.
FA 44 is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for next item.
Mr. President, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would move to reconsider the vote just taken on FA 44.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, this is the state auditor, then Mike Foley. He's the state auditor again. His letter to DHHS about the TANF fund, rainy day fund, and he said we consider number 5 TANF cash reserve fund to be a significant deficiency. So overall summary, there were 6,441 individuals who received Employment First or EF supportive services payments of $4,024,694 for fiscal year ending, thank you, ended on June 30th, 2014. FY 2014. These individuals were also included among 13,491 individuals who received Aid to Dependent Children or ADC payments of $25,626,034. The APA conducted detailed testing of 20 cases. One case may have more than one individual if they live in the same household, with payments totaling $141,678, which resulted in $71,337 of question costs as described below. Okay. EF supportive services, type of issue, unreasonable, not in compliance with regs, lack of documentation and eligibility, question cost $61,817. ADA cash assistance programs, not eligible due to income, resources waivers, or unit size. ADA cash assistance programs, sanctions not properly imposed. Okay, so then we go. There was also a lack of monitoring of the contractors by DHHS to ensure compliance with program regulations. Eligibility reviews were not completed timely, contractor monitoring was inadequate, and numerous other issues were noted during the detailed testing. Also, even after DHHS was notified of allegations of fraud on cases, the cases were not followed up on. Additionally, as of June 30th, 2014, DHHS had a total of $55,862,935 in federal TANF funds that were authorized for use but not expended. Of that amount, DHHS could have used $14,743,235 in federal funds over the previous 2 years. FY 2013 and FY 2014, which would have reduced the use of funds, of state funds, and the burden of the Nebraska taxpayers. Background information. Temporary Assistance to Needy Family, TANF, is a federal program meant to assist in providing essential care to enable dependent children to remain in their own home and allow for health, growth, and development. Nebraska's TANF cash assistance program is also known as Aid to Dependent Children and provides monthly cash assistance to individuals who have dependent children and fall within the income and resource limitations. The resource limitation is generally $6,000, and the income limitations vary depending on the size and circumstance of the household. The maximum amount of cash assistance is $222 per month for the first individual, increasing by $71 for each additional person included in the household unit. This is the maximum amount. So if the household has no income, the maximum amount that they can get is $221 a month for the first individual, adding $71 for the additional individuals. No other money. That's it. So a single parent with one kid could have less than $300 a month to live off of. And we have $130 million sitting in the rainy day fund going unutilized because we have not done anything to change the eligibility requirements. But we could. We could today. We could on this bill. We won't. Mostly, well, maybe not mostly. I hope the reason that we won't do it today is that we legitimately don't have enough time to get an amendment drafted before we go to cloture on this bill. But I fear that we won't today because we just don't care. That's my fear. I hope I am wrong. I really hope I'm wrong. I really hope that we collectively as a body do care and do see this as an opportunity to do something really positive for the people of Nebraska that are in economic crisis. We have the power to change lives. I hope that we use that power. Okay. Prior to the receipt of ADC cash assistance, any work-eligible individuals in the household unit are required to participate in Employment First, or EF, activities, including employment, job searching, education, vocational training, or community service. Each work-eligible individual must complete an EF orientation and assessment, sign a self-sufficiency contract, and agree to a service plan defining the participants' EF activities and requirements. Once these steps toward Employment First enrollment have been completed, the individual can begin receiving monthly ADC payments. Nebraska work-eligible individuals include all adults up to age 64, excluding individuals medically unable to work. For example, those who are disabled, ill, have an injury, or are in the third trimester of pregnancy. Other exemptions include those who are needed in the home to provide care to a disabled family member or child less than 12 weeks old. Children ages 16 to 18 are excluded only if enrolled in attending school on a regular basis. Single parent households are required to participate at least 30 hours per week, 20 hours per week if they have a child less than 16 years of age, while two-parent households are required to participate either 33, 35, or 55 hours per week, depending on whether they receive federally funded childcare. I want to pause and talk about the minimum wage issue here. So children ages 16 to 18 are excluded from the work requirement only if they are enrolled in school on a regular basis. And even if kids 16 to 18 are enrolled in school, this implies, and I think I'll have to look for clarification on it, but it implies that if they are working, that their income, that a teenager's income in their household is going to count towards the household income benefit for TANF. So they should be paid the same minimum wage as a working adult because we as the government are acknowledging that they are financially responsible and part of the financial security of the household in which they reside. So we should not have a different minimum wage for them because we are treating their income as income into that household for government services and benefits. So they should be treated the same as anyone else getting minimum wage. The Employment First program also provides certain payments for supportive services, including gas, vehicle insurance and registration, clothing, vehicle repairs, and bus or cab fares in order to facilitate full participation in the program. The following table shows a breakdown of the total ADC and EF expenditures for FY 2014 per the Nebraska Information System. Enterprise 1, E1, there were 6,441 individuals who received EF supportive services payments.
One minute.
Thank you. services, payments, and these individuals were also included among the 13,491 individuals who received ADC payments. Source of funds, federal and state. ADC cash assistance, 14 million from the federal, 11 million from the state. EF supportive services, 3.5 million from the federal, and 400,000 from the state. This is totaling 29.6 million. Our block grant is 54 million, I believe. So EF supportive services are paid with 90% federal funds and 10% state funds. Although in certain instances, such as household that qualifies as a two-parent family or cases in which the family...
That's your time, Senator. Senator Linehan has some guests in the North Balcony. AIM Homeschool Group from Omaha, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're next and recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I have one more time and then a close. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. EF supportive services are paid with 90% federal funds, 10% state funds. Meanwhile, ADC cash assistant payments are paid primarily with 80% federal funds and 20% state funds. Although in certain instances, such as households that qualify as two-parent family or in cases in which the family is exempt from EF participation, the ADC payment is 100% funded by the state. The following table shows the total FY 2014 EF supportive services broken down by the type of service. Okay, type of EF supportive services. Motor vehicle gas, motor vehicle repairs, transportation commercial, insurance premium for a vehicle, clothing, motor vehicle taxes, motor vehicle repair estimate, motor vehicle purchase, motor vehicle licensing fee. Oh, somebody is talkative. So Christmas Eve Mass, one of my favorite things that the priest would say growing up, because Christmas Eve Mass is for the kids. Really, it should be for the kids. It all should be for the kids. But the priest would always say, let the children be heard. And it is delightful to hear whatever child that is up there today and to remind us who we are here to serve and work for. Motor vehicle licensing fees, tuition, other costs, interpreter, student fees, motor vehicle inspection, motor vehicle loan payment, driver's license fee, operational exam and licensing fee, tools, work supplies, books, personal care, rent, assessment, adult basic education, school or work physical, office examination, and treatment. So those are all things that EF Employment First Supportive Services, which are great. It's hard to believe that we only spend $4 million on those services a year. And perhaps that's another thing that we should be looking at, is increasing how much we are investing in those services, because certainly if we want people in the workforce, I think I talked about this a little bit last week, transportation, we are not a multi-mobile state yet. We certainly are always working towards it with our mass transit systems, but until we have greater infrastructure in our mass transit, in our urban cores, we are going to need to rely on individual motor vehicles. Okay, back to the audit. DHHS has, am I on my second time, or my first time?
You'll have one more time and your close.
Okay, thank you. I lost track of where I was. Okay, DHHS has 2 contracts that provide case management and program services for the EF program. Policy Studies, Inc., required by Maximus in 2012, provides services in the Eastern Service Area, and Arbor ENT LLC D/B/A was Rescar Riscare Workforce Services provides services throughout the state. Okay, so these are the companies that we're outsourcing the employment first services to. The amounts paid to these contractors are not included in the amounts above. For FY,
1 minute.
Thank you. For FY 2014, DHHS paid these contractors the following. Oh, holy moly, guacamole. What we paid the companies that we hired to provide $4 million in services, we paid one of them $9.9 million and the other one $3.7 million. I am in the wrong business. What? Senator Reapy, let's look up a new business model, shall we? During FY 2014, the only monitoring of the EF contractors by DHHS was a monthly random sample review to determine if the work participation rates were properly calculated. The APA selected 20 cases for detailing testing from a total of
That's your time, Senator.
Thank
You're
you.
next in the queue, and then you'll have your close after that.
Thank you, Mr. President. The APA selected 20 cases for detailed testing from a total of 6,441 individuals who received EF supportive services during fiscal year 2014. Exhibit A includes a summary of the questioned costs for each of the 20 cases tested. Additional details on the testing performed and the issues noted are included in the comments and recommendations section below. I'm still hung up on how much we paid these companies. So I have read parts of this before. I've never read this entire audit before. Mostly I just focused on the fact that we have such a massive rainy day fund, but well, I guess we're on this journey together. Comments and recommendations. Employment first question costs. The APA performed a detailed review of the EF supportive service payments made during the fiscal year for the 20 ADC cases selected for testing. The 20 cases received $79,251 in EF supportive services. The review consisted of ensuring the payments were in accordance with regulations, policies, and other guidance. The APA also considered the reasonableness and necessity of the supportive service payments. As a result, the APA identified a number of issues that led the APA to question a significant portion of the $61,817 out of the $79,251 of the supportive service payments tested. The following table provides a summary of the question costs for the EF supportive service payments. And there is a summary. Improper registration, insurance costs, improper repair costs, documentation of fuel payments limits, employment first eligibility, transportation not limited to first pay period. Note, no dollar amounts are included because the payments have been previously questioned in one of the above categories. Unreasonable or unnecessary supportive services. The APA found unreasonable or unnecessary supportive services were provided for 5 cases, resulting in the total question cost of nearly $28,000. Case 12, question supportive services was $11,753. Over $11,000 in cab fare was incurred in June 2013 and December 2013 through April 2014. The individual acquired a 2000 Pontiac, Montana on February 10th, 2012, which was properly titled and registered from February 2013 to February 2014. The individual also had a valid driver's license issued December 2010, which did not expire until April 2015. Vehicle repairs on the vehicle were also paid in July 2013. The vehicle was sold in January 2014. It appears unreasonable to pay for expensive cab rides rather than pay for gas vouchers for the vehicle during this period of time. Not arguing that, but also $11,000 in cab fare for June, and then December, January, February, March, April. 5 months, 6 months? Maybe. I guess 6 months is a long time. All right. There's more explanations of concerns over the Employment First program. And then
1 minute.
thank you. Office of Management and Budget, OMB, Circular 8A-87 discusses, I wonder what the circular is, discusses general principles for determining allowable federal expenditures and requires the spending of federal grant funds to be reasonable. Specifically, Attachment A, Section C2 states, in relevant part, a cost is reasonable if in its nature and amount it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances prevailing at the time the decision was made to incur the cost. The question of reasonableness is particularly important when government units or components are predominantly federally funded. Additionally, Title 468 NAC 1-008 describes the prudent person principle as, well, I'm going to wait. How much time do I have left?
That's your time,
Great.
Senator, and you're recognized to close on your motion to reconsider.
Great. I did not want to be interrupted as I read the prudent person principle because I am fascinated as to what that is. Okay. The prudent person principle described as when the statements of the client are incomplete, unclear, or inconsistent, or when other circumstances in the particular case indicate to a prudent person that further inquiry must be made. The worker must obtain additional verification before eligibility is determined. The client has primary responsibility for providing verification of information relating to eligibility verification. Verification may be supplied in person, through the mail, or from another source as an employer. If it would be extremely difficult or impossible for the client to furnish verification in a timely manner, the worker must offer assistance. Improper registration and insurance costs. Appendix 468-000-309 contains the EF Supportive Services Guidelines, including a section entitled, quote, automobiles, purchases, end quote, which states, quote, a maximum of $500 is allowable to pay the tax, licensing, insurance, typically the first 3 months of insurance, end quote. Although the regulation is related to the purchase of new vehicles, in discussion with DHHS policy staff, the APA was advised that this limit should apply to all tax, licensing, and insurance payments. Under the, quote, automobiles, semicolon, licensing, insurance, driver's license section, end quote, section, that same appendix provides, 1, the cost of licensing or insurance not related to the purchase of automobiles is allowed if it determines that transportation is required for participation in the client's self-sufficiency contract. Again, typically the insurance allowed is for 3 months. 2, the vehicle must be registered in the participant's name. 3, the participant must demonstrate that she or he can pay for subsequent insurance costs. The APA found 15 cases in which the registration and insurance costs paid exceeded the $500 limitation. Additionally, for 9 of 18 cases tested, there was a lack of documentation to determine whether the insurance costs complied with the above regulation. In all 9 of the cases, there was no documentation to indicate that subsequent insurance costs could be paid. In fact, in 2 cases, the insurance policies were canceled immediately after the coverage paid by DHHS had lapsed. Additionally, the documentation for the insurance coverage often did not identify the coverage period or which vehicle was being insured. The APA questions the total of $13,354 in registration and insurance costs paid due to payments either lacking required documentation or being in excess of the specified $500 limitation. documentation of insurance coverage did not identify coverage period or vehicle. That part I find really odd because I mean, I have car insurance. It says the time period and the name of the car and the VIN number and all that stuff on my car insurance. So how the documentation wouldn't indicate that is kind of confusing to me. Okay, so then it goes through the cases, explaining them in more detail. I'm not going to read that right now. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
1 minute.
Thank you. Shouldn't be tired. No, we didn't have any soccer games this weekend. The Saturday game was canceled because of all of the rain on Friday. And then the Sunday game didn't happen because First Communions were happening at the parish. So didn't want to have soccer conflicting with First Communion. Okay, improper repair costs. I'm going to skip down a little bit again. Informal DHHS written policies appear to allow for repairs in excess of the trade-in value of the vehicle if approved by the DHHS policy unit. This contradicts 468-000-309, which states that the cost of repairs should be based on the vehicle's trade-in value. Additionally, it appears there is no lifetime limit on repairs. Instead, they are considered on a pre-request basis, regardless of previous repair costs incurred. My first year, there was a bill to tax
Thank you,
car
Senator.
repair. Thank you.
That's your time. Members, the question is the motion to reconsider. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
0 ayes, 24 nays, Mr. President, on the motion to reconsider.
The motion to reconsider fails. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, next amendment, FA 48, consisting of the 4th Division of AM 1332, Sections 51 and 52, which contain the contents of Legislative Bill 548.
Senator Hansen, you're recognized to open on FA 48.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I learned earlier today that I always referred to you as Mr. Lieutenant Governor, and I guess the appropriate way to do it is Mr. President when you're up in the chair. So every time I've done that, I apologize. I didn't realize somebody just told me that this morning, one of the staff. So thank you, Mr. President. All right, so FA 48, the clerk mentioned, is consistent of LB 548, which is Senator Ballard's bill, and allows an applicant for the pharmacist license to no longer need to obtain a grade of 75 on the pharmacy jurisprudence examination. Also, any person authorized to compound do so in compliance with the standards of the U.S. Pharmacopoeia and the National Formulary. LB 548 was advanced to general file with a 7-0 vote. And I would encourage everyone to vote green when it comes up. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just trying to fix my podium thing here because it is killing my back to bend over here. So I'm just stacking all my binders. I'm a real binder person to begin with, but they're coming in handy at this moment. Oh my gosh, that's so much better. Still probably not high enough for my colleague over here who's about a good foot taller than me. Okay, FA 48, and I think we have an hour and 20 minutes left-ish. Looking up front like somebody phone a friend, maybe. We have this one, and then I think we have 3 more after this. And I'll talk on this for 15 minutes, and then the next 2 for 15 minutes. And I have amendments to the bill, but I don't want to submit them because it's kind of a pain for staff when I submit a bunch of amendments that we then don't use. So I'm trying to just keep them on my desk in case I need them. And instead of filing the amendments, I'm filing the motions to reconsider the vote. I honestly don't know if that is easier for staff or not. It is. We're just going to go with it is. I'm seeing head nods up front. So most of what I do is a pain for staff. So when I can make it ever minutely less painful, I attempt to. Okay, back to TANF. I'm on page 12 of this 30-page audit. Too bad it's not like 10 o'clock at night. This would be great bedtime reading for a lot of people because I'm kind of putting myself to bed with this. But okay, I'm skimming down to there's all these explanations of the costs, and it really is pretty fascinating, but it's not fascinating to read out loud. So here we go. This is on page 14. Without proper monitoring and controls, overpayments approved by contractors without proper monitoring and controls overpayments approved by contractors, there is an increased risk that payments made by DHHS will not be in compliance with acceptable rules and regulations. We recommend DHHS review its contracts to ensure the services provided by the contractors are performed in accordance with DHHS rules, regulations, and guidelines covering the program. Based on the findings contained in this report, DHHS should consider additional training of those employees and contractors involved in the EF program to ensure payments are reasonable and necessary given the circumstances. The $500 limitation for registration and insurance costs is adhered to. Documentation supporting issue insurance costs is on file and provides sufficient details, including the vehicle being insured and the coverage period. Documentation is available to ensure the ability to pay subsequent insurance costs. Payments are not made for vehicle repairs when the estimated repair cost exceeds the trade-in value of the vehicle. Consideration is given to prior repair costs when approving payments for vehicle repairs. Documentation is maintained to identify the miles from his or her home to any of his or her component activities to ensure fuel payments are calculated in accordance with the 25-cent per mile limitation. I do wonder if that 25-cent per mile limitation is tied to
1 minute.
inflation, because like we get our mileage reimbursement and it's tied to what the government reimbursement is. Supportive service payments are appropriately terminated when no longer eligible for ADC or transitional services. Transportation costs are properly limited to the first full pay period of employment. Oh, I need to get in the queue. I keep kind of losing track. I'm like, oh, we're just going to go to a vote. And then I realized we just went to a vote and here we are. Okay. Transportation costs are properly limited to the first full pay period of employment. DHHS has a response to this. In May 2014, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, TANF policy staff began to review EF supportive service claims. These reviews began as a result of concerns similar to those identified in this review. Using a statistically valid sampling tool, staff reviewed selected paid...
That's your time, and you're next in the queue.
Staff reviewed selected paid claims every month. The claims are reviewed to assure services were authorized within established guidelines and additions and regulations. In addition, vendor payments are now made online through OnBase, so the reviews include assessing documentation in support of the paid claims. I find that so bad. Like, you can't, anybody who's had to like file an insurance claim, whether it's car insurance or getting reimbursed for healthcare insurance or anything like that, it's like super rigmarole, lots of steps. So the fact that like we had systems in place that were not as robust as that are kind of surprising. But we also were paying the companies that were administering the program like 3 times as much as we were spending on the individuals within the program. So Not, in my opinion, the best steward of the dollars, but I guess that's fine. Okay, so I'm going back to the underlying article. I might come back to this audit report later. Oh, sorry. Okay, we've got the report from the Legislative Fiscal Office, which I believe was drafted, by Liz Haruska, who was in the Legislative Fiscal Office, and she retired at the end of last year. And it's a big loss for the state because she was really the TANF expert. That's not to say we have amazing people working in Legislative Fiscal Office. Just, Liz had decades of institutional knowledge. So her TANF report, and this was for the interim, I'm so sorry. The interim hearing that we had last year, she prepared this report. TANF report, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families is a federal block grant. Oh, I need to get the cue. Is a federal block grant program to states for time-limited and work-conditioned income maintenance assistance and other supportive services for low-income families and children. I feel like that is important when I am trying to convince you all, and I know I'm failing, but I'm still trying to convince you all that we should consider amending TANF onto one of the HHS bills. It is important to remember that it is time-limited and work-conditioned. So this isn't just a giveaway for people to stay home and do nothing. I know that's always like the primary concern. We don't have that concern about corporate giveaways or massive wealthy tax cuts. But when we're talking about really, really impoverished people, we want to make sure that we're making it difficult. We are. Don't worry. It's hard. It's hard being poor. Nobody wants to be poor. Okay. In Nebraska, the TANF block grant is used for cash assistance, employment-related services, childcare, child welfare, and administrative costs. Nebraska receives approximately $56.6 million a year from the TANF block grant. States are allowed to carry over unspent funding for a subsequent year. The carryover funds may be used for any allowable TANF purpose. The carryover balances are referred to as rainy day funds. Legislation is often introduced with the intent to use the rainy day funds. This report is to assist senators in understanding the federal requirements and the flexibility allowed for the use of the TANF funds to better assess uses of the fund when proposed. Background.
1 minute.
Thank you. In 1996, Congress passed the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act of 1996, or PROWARA. That doesn't seem like a word. PRWORA. PROWARA? We'll just say PROWARA. PROWARA of 1968. The Federal Aid to Families with Dependent Children program changed from federal state match program to a block grant. The change to a block grant gave states greater flexibility in designing programs and providing services, but also came with new requirements and a major focus on work requirements and incentives for those receiving assistance. Again, the whole premise of this program is focused on work requirements. We are not just giving money to abject poverty. We are giving money to people in abject poverty that are
That's your time,
required to
Senator.
jump hoops.
And you're next in the queue, and that's your last time on the floor amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, so federal requirements. All uses of TANF funds must meet one of four purposes: assist needy families so that children can be prepared for their own home, cared for in their own homes, reducing the dependency of needy parents by promoting job preparation, work, and marriage, preventing out-of-wedlock pregnancies, and encouraging the formation and maintenance of two-parent families. Those last two just get me every time. Like the federal government is getting like that is bedroom politics, if you ask me. Preventing out of wedlock pregnancies. What might be more appropriate is preventing or supporting. No, I can't think of how it would be more appropriate. I think it's probably just not appropriate for the federal government to say that they're working to prevent out of wedlock pregnancies. Okay, so especially the irony of that is when this was created in 1996, same-sex marriage was not a thing. And so if you were a pregnant individual in a relationship, a same-sex relationship, you could not have an in-wedlock pregnancy. Like the federal government prohibited you from having an in-wedlock pregnancy, but they were trying to prevent out-of-wedlock pregnancies. And we were discriminating against who could get married. So bygones though, right? Although four purposes are broad in nature and allow states great flexibility in designing programs and delivering services, there are also specific requirements that states must meet to continue to receive their full block grant allotment. In order to maintain the block grant funding, the state must meet certain other financial and programmatic requirements. Okay. Sorry, family group text always is distracting. It's a 17-person group text, so it's like a lot of random things. Basketball scores during March Madness, football scores during football season, or I should just say sports ball scores randomly come on my phone, mostly from my dad, sometimes my brothers across the country. My niece does not weigh in very often. Those of you that know her, she doesn't weigh in very often in the family group text, but she's on it. I hope she has it muted because there's like 500 texts a day. That would be very disruptive when she's in class. Okay. State may be penalized for the following: use of funds in violation of the purposes, failure to meet the maintenance of effort or MOE, failure to satisfy minimum work participation rates, failure to participate in the income and eligibility verification system, failure to enforce penalties requested by the child support agency, failure to comply with the 5-year time limit on assistance. Maintenance of effort. Nebraska receives approximately $56.6 million a year. The state is required to meet maintenance of effort, which is based on the 1995 spending levels for cash assistance and work programs. To meet the MOE obligation, a state must report spending and equal to at least 80%
1
of its
minute.
historic spending level. This minimum share falls to 75% for any year in which state meets its TANF work participation rate requirement. In Nebraska, the MOE is approximately $28.4 million. The state must meet all federal requirements to be subjected or may be subjected to penalties of reduction of $1 for every $1 below the MOE. The chart below shows the expenditures for the MOE from FY19 through FY 2020. Okay, HHS programs, tax credits. During the 2 federal fiscal years, the Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC, and the Child Care Tax Credit were 72% and 69% of the MOE. State expenditures in DHHS programs alone do not
That's your
meet the
time.
MOE. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Hansen, you are recognized to close on floor amendment 48 and waive closing. Members, the question is the adoption of FA 48. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. It's been a request for a call of the House. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
14 ayes, 4 nays to place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators Blood, Raybold, Conrad, Wishart, Dover, Clemens, Bostelman, Hughes, Ballard, Moser, Dungan, Sanders, and Boson, please return to the chamber and record your presence. The House is under call. Senator Hansen, we're missing 12 members. How would you like to proceed?
May proceed.
Will you accept call-in votes?
That'd be yes, right? Yes.
Mr. Clerk.
Senator Wayne, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Sanders,
Record,
voting
Mr.
yes.
Clerk.
Vote is 27 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
FA 48 is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items. I raise the call.
Mr. President, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh moved to reconsider the vote just taken on MO9 with MO 951.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to open on the motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I actually didn't vote for this bill out of committee, which is FA 48. Okay, I was reading the report from the TANF report from our fiscal office. Ooh, my foolproof stacking very tenuously of binders is not holding up here. Let's see, what else can I put here? I've got a lot of binders. They're not full of women, but the time when Mitt Romney said that binders full of women, and it seemed like such a ridiculous statement, now it actually is like, that's really smart. You had binders full of women so that you were making sure that you were looking for more qualified female candidates. Like, what a great thing to do. Mittens, that's his nickname, Mitt Romney, Mittens. Okay, is this? No, that's the other document. Sorry, let's see here. It's a policy brief. Ooh, geez. Interim study report. Okay, there we go. Separate state programs and solely state programs. TANF funding is not allowed for all assistance programs serving low-income families. There are two categories of programs not allowed to be paid from TANF funds. Those are the separate state program and the solely state program. The separate state program counts toward meeting the state's MOE, but the participants are not counted towards the state's work requirements. Solely state program expenditures do not count toward the state's MOE, and the participants are not counted toward the work requirements. The programs are paid from state general funds. Separate state programs. Nebraska has two separate state programs. One exempts single-parent families or minor parents receiving ADC from work requirements if they meet the following criteria. 1, pregnant women beginning the first of the month before the month of the mother's due date are exempt. 2, parents or needy caretaker relatives, guardians, or conservators of a child under the age of 12 weeks. The other allows parents to pursue post-secondary education in lieu of work. Post-secondary education is not allowed to count towards meeting the federal work requirements. Solely state programs, in Nebraska, those exempt from the work requirements and federal time limit under the solely state program are those where the adult or minor parent is incapacitated with a medically detrimental physical, mental, or emotional impairment, or those who have significant barriers to participation in approved work activities. Those barriers include a parent who is needed to provide continuous care for a family member with a disability, victims of domestic violence, single parents who are unable to obtain childcare, and parents over age of 65. Work requirements. The state's work participation rates are 50% overall and 90% for two-parent families. States can reduce the targets through caseload reduction credits. For every percentage point the state reduces its caseload below the FY 2005 level, the credit reduces the state's target participation rate by 1 percentage point. Excess MOE spending serves as a caseload reduction credit. Nebraska has claimed child welfare TANF funds, tribal TANF, respite care expenditures, the earned income tax credit, and early childhood grants in the excess MOE calculation. Failure to meet the work participation rates would result in penalties. The first year a penalty is assessed, the block grant is reduced by 5%, approximately $2.9 million in Nebraska. And by an additional 2%, approximately $1.2 million in Nebraska for each subsequent year of noncompliance. The state's MOE would also increase the percentage decline in the block grant. In FY 2006, the state barely met the work participation rate, placing the block grant funding at risk. Excess MOE has helped to eliminate the likelihood of a penalty being assessed against the state, especially the earned income tax credit, which provides the majority of the offset to the work participation rates. Allowable transfer. Federal law allows transfers of the TANF block grant up to 30% to the Child Care and Development Block Grant, $16,988,170, and up to 10% to the Title 20 Social Services Block Grant, $5,662,726. The combined amount cannot exceed 30% of the grant, the $16,988,170. Programs supported by TANF. Administration funds are used for staff and overhead expenses for administering assistance programs. These funds support Access Nebraska and related administrative expenses based on a cost allocation plan. Administrative costs are capped at 15% of the block grant. Child care assistance is available at no cost to families receiving ADC cash assistance or those whose gross income and unearned income is at or below 100% of the federal poverty line, FPL. Families whose incomes are above the current income standard for child care subsidy may be eligible for a partial subsidy if their gross earned and unearned income is at or below 185% of FPL. On October 1, 2023, the income limit reverts to 130%. Not with this bill, right, Senator DeBoer? Senator DeBoer's bill, which is in LB 227, takes care of this very issue that I am talking about with the child care eligibility. If we were to not pass LB 227, which I don't think is going to be a problem, then what is being outlined here would take into effect, and that would be a problem. Information systems are used to support information systems used for eligibility, client activities, and payment processing. Information systems costs are not included in the 15% administrative cap. Okay. Aid to Dependent Children, ADC, provides cash assistance as part of the TANF program to low-income families with children 18 or younger. ADC income is used to pay for family living expenses like rent, utilities, food, clothing, and other necessities. Child welfare funds, an array of safety and in-home services are provided to families whose children have been determined to be unsafe in their family, homes, or to the community. Eligibility is based on the family's eligibility for one of the following programs: Aid to Dependent Children, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or Medicaid. The target population is children ages 0 through 18 who are involved in a proceeding in the juvenile court system and placed in the custody of the department for reasons of abuse, neglect, status offense, or delinquency. Thank you. As well as families who are not involved in court proceedings but who agree to participate in safety services. The following services are provided in-home safety services: intensive family preservation services, family support services, family pure and support and respite services. Employment First provides assistance for people through the transition from the Aid to Dependent Children to the workforce. Home Visitations supports pregnant and parenting families of children from birth through age 5 who may struggle with significant life stressors such as poverty, exposure to violence, and substance abuse. Parenting teens or military families with one or more parent in the service. Families must be at or below 250% of poverty. So for services like home visitation, we have the eligibility limit at 250%. So you can participate in the programs, but you can't get.
That's your time, Senator, and you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. So you can participate in the home visitation program if you're at 250% of poverty, but you can't get Aid to Dependent Families cash assistance if you are 50% poverty. You have to be below 50% of poverty. And as I said at the onset, the monthly income has to be less than our monthly income. That's very little. You have to make less than we as state legislators make to qualify for direct cash assistance. So you can understand how this program is so underutilized and why our rainy day fund continues to grow year after year, because we have not changed the eligibility in decades. And because we have not changed the eligibility, we are making this problem ourselves. So we can create new programs to spend money, or we can increase eligibility to help families directly. My first couple of years when I was working on the family support waiver, I kept being told that the reason that we couldn't do a family support waiver for children with developmental disabilities was it was a new program. I had to fight for years to get a family support waiver for developmentally disabled children because it was a new program. And this year, instead of changing the eligibility to help more individuals with cash assistance, we're going to create new programs to spend that money and take it away from their pockets and give them programming. Programming is fine. It's not as good as food. It's not as good as housing, and it's not as good as clothing. So before we do any new programming, let's take care of the basic essential needs, and let's increase TANF eligibility and access to the cash assistance for aid to dependent children. Okay. One more time in the queue, and then my close, and then we go to a vote on this motion, and that'll fail. And then we go to the next floor amendment 49. And I get 15 minutes on that. So I've got 10 minutes here, 15 on that. That's 25 minutes. Then I'll have to do another motion to reconsider. That'll be 25 minutes. And so 25 to 50 minutes. So I probably don't need to do a second motion to reconsider because we have two more amendments. And even though I picked out a number of bills to have divided, I'm not targeting any of them. I mean, I think I made my point very clearly on Friday that I am displeased with hospitals and the Hospital Association and Children's Hospital with their lack of advocacy on behalf of their patients and their primary interest in their pocketbooks over patient care. If I haven't, I hope I just made that clear now. I am displeased with the hospitals, the Hospital Association and Children's Hospital for those reasons. That they show up to the legislature, but only to advocate for their pocketbooks and not to advocate for policies that directly impact the care and well-being of their patients.
1 minute.
That to me is problematic and infuriating. But that said, I still believe in healthcare in Nebraska. And so I don't want any of these bills to specifically fail. I just divided the question and picked bills out kind of at random, just to take time. So all of that is to say that I probably don't need to do another motion to reconsider if we are going to 11:45 on this bill. No, 11:25. Oh my gosh, that was the best numbers up front for me ever. That means I only have 30 minutes left. Woo. Definitely not going to do another motion to reconsider then. We can do this one, and then we can do the next floor amendment.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Ibach has visitors in the north balcony, fourth graders from Overton Public School. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak. This is your third time on the reconsider.
Great. Is this my close?
No, you'll have your close also.
Okay, fantastic. I'm just super pumped about the 30-minute warning. That just great. Okay, so And then after that, we get to the exec board bill that poor legal counsel for the exec board has been attempting to have a show up for late nights numerous times. So I'm glad we're starting on it earlier in the day because I've been feeling pretty bad about that one. Okay, TANF. Oh, I got locked out of my computer. There we go. That was not an IT problem. It's just that my computer locked out and I just had to wait a moment for it to be logged back in, and we're all good. Okay, so this is the interim study report. And employment first, home visitation. Where was I at? Child welfare. SNAP training and employment. This is a partnership with the Department of Labor. I believe this is actually a program that Speaker Arch maybe passed, the employment training and employment with SNAP. I think that came out of HHS since I've been here, and I think it was Speaker Arch's bill, but I, of course, always stand for correction. Anyways, SNAP training and employment. This is a partnership with the Department of Labor. SNAP recipients in certain areas of the state who are not receiving ADC or employment first benefits are eligible. They are provided with work preparation training such as job search and on-the-job training and supportive services such as transportation and clothing for interviews. Emergency assistance, financial assistance to low-income families to address an emergency situation that threatens the well-being of an eligible child or family. The assistance must be used to help turn a family to a stable environment which they will be able to maintain. Alternative response. Alternative response is an approach to work with families with allegations of abuse or neglect to safely care for children in their home and communities. Families are connected to services and or informal supports to improve parents' ability to protect their children. Fatherhood Initiative. The Fatherhood Initiative project exists to serve Nebraska fathers who are wanting to better connect or re-engage with their children and learn how to be better parents. The Fatherhood Initiative staff of case managers, supervisors, trainers, and employment specialists assist fathers in their efforts to overcome struggles and improve their lives for the overall betterment of the family. JAG program, affiliated with the national organization Jobs of America. Graduates, JAG, collaborates with the United Way and participating school districts. JAG Nebraska helps students overcome challenges to achieve personal and career success after high school. Certified career specialists teach a minimum of 37 skills during regular classroom hours to students interested in participating. The JAG curriculum prepares students for future jobs. Then the following chart shows TANF expenditures by federal fiscal year from FY 2016 through FY 2021. It's got a list. Oh gosh, this is a little small.
1 minute.
Thank you. Okay, so it has the TANF grant spending by federal fiscal year and starts in 2016, goes to 2021. Administration, childcare, information services, work activity admin, that has ended. Cash assistance, pandemic COVID FY 20, child welfare services, work activities, employment first. ARA, spent on work act, that ended. Home visitation, women's health alternative has ended. Subsidized employment has ended. Family-focused case management, SSBG transfer, bridge, I don't know what that means. St. Monica's Women Are Sacred, SSBG community response, SSBG childcare fingerprinting, SNAP, employment and training.
That's your time, Senator. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Raybold, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, fellow Nebraskans watching on TV. I stand in opposition to the reconsideration motion and in support of LB 27 and the amendments attached to that. I know that Senator McKinney did a wonderful job speaking about criminal justice reform and his opposition to funding and building a new prison. And I just want to point to the Nebraska Criminal Justice Reinvestment Working Group and their final report. And I'd like to send a copy to each of my colleagues on just how important it is that we revisit this issue when it comes to funding a new prison. You know, the discussion on funding a new prison has been going on since Governor Heineman, Governor Ricketts, and now under Governor Pillen. And instead of doing a lot of the recommendations that were presented in this final report first, before we undergo that extraordinarily expensive facility building, we really need to take some of these recommendations seriously that was done in the good spirit and working with the Justice Reinvestment Initiative that was designed. And so I'm just going to read a couple of the things that we all know about the overcrowding in the prison, that the sentences are increasing. And when we're looking at the sentences, why are those sentences increasing? The Omaha World Herald did a great report last year talking about those. And it said, you know, and Senator McKinney has said this very clearly. We've introduced some bills this legislative session that talks about more programming while we have those individuals in the penitentiary and the county jails. That is essential to make sure that they get the programming they need. For the last several years, there has been no programming in the penitentiary and other corrections facilities. And this is something that we need to address immediately so that when those individuals have completed their sentence and they're out in the community, they have a semblance of understanding how certain actions that they took led to where they are. And so we reduce the likelihood of them to recidivate. So we know that programming in the jail is essential, but also looking at the communities that have those high incidents of reincarceration. What are we doing in those communities? And one of the things that they talked about is a reinvestment there is essential to make sure that those individuals, once they leave the facility, have the skill set and the tools they need to succeed. And as a former county commissioner, we advocated heavily that they looked at making sure that those individuals that were getting behavioral health treatment and treatment for their addiction would be qualified and set up on Medicaid. And why is that important? Because once they leave the facility, they will have a likelihood of continuation of the treatment that they need for their behavioral health issues and their addiction. And that's so fundamentally important. And that's where the funding should go. You've heard me talk about this before, that we really need to invest in our regional center. We need to be highly active in recruiting more psychiatrists to assist in that facility to make sure that those individuals are restored to their competencies so they can serve out their term, or they can actually get the care and treatment they need to be a better citizen once they're released. So these are funding mechanisms we should be focused on. Think of it this: if we spent $1 million to recruit at least
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. 2 or 3 amazing psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse support staff, we could go a long way in reducing the backlog that is in county jails and those that are sitting in our penitentiary with no programming and no assistance once they leave. And we also need to look at probation and parole. You know, once you are assigned parole and probation, you go down to the county level, but there is no funding at the county level to make sure that they have the facilities that can house the additional parole and probation officers to follow up on those individuals that have been given probation and are now back out in the county. So these are some things that I know Senator McKinney has talked so eloquently about, but we really need to look at these actions first before we start funding a new correction facility.
That's your time,
Thank
Senator.
you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Raybold, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I just want to read some of the policy options that were done in the criminal justice reinvestment support. And I know that the legislature last year took up some of these, but some of the most critical and most impactful ones were clearly overlooked. You know, they said focus corrections resources on violent and high-risk individuals. And that makes sense. It said option 1, establish a streamlined parole process for certain eligible individuals. Option number 2, increased investment in assistant probation officer positions who can provide direct support to the probation officers supervising high-risk caseloads. Option 3, establish supportive housing programs for individuals on supervision in the community. And I want to just address that one, when it comes to housing, that is the most critical need for any individual as they leave the correction facility, is that they have adequate housing and the resources to help them find a job. The next category is address regional inconsistencies and outcomes across the state. Option 4, create statewide standards for the use of early probation discharge. Option 5, narrow broad sentencing ranges by tailoring punishments to specific levels of seriousness. Option 6, reduce jamming out releases. Option 7, increase education for stakeholders about young adults involved in the criminal justice system. Option 8, expand problem-solving courts. And we know, certainly in Lancaster County, how fundamentally important the problem-solving courts are. They have demonstrated that they have lower recidivism rates, so those individuals go through a rigorous counseling, treatment, and retraining process. So I can speak directly to the adult court program that we have in Lancaster County. Those individuals that qualify for the program, and this is done with the county attorney's office, and if they go through adult drug court, it's up to a 2-year program where you have intensive treatment and counseling and therapy and over that long period of time, and it is not an easy program. Every day you have to report for duty to give a urine sample to make sure that you are staying clean and sober. That's adult drug court, but we also have expanded to the veterans adult program, and that has been so fundamentally important for a segment of our population that has struggled to be reintegrated in our communities after serving in our military forces. And so that's essential. And we're looking at mental health courts now to be able to do the same thing, where they get the behavioral health treatment they need to succeed. And lastly, DUI diversion. That is so fundamentally important with those individuals who clearly have a drinking problem, that they are going through this process of diversion that helps them succeed. And the beauty of the problem-solving courts is they're restored back to their families, who are overjoyed to see that they've kicked their addiction and all the demons that have been plaguing them for all these years. And lastly, I just want to give an explanation of my vote that I voted on last week on LB 73. That's the scholarship funding for non-public schools. And I have to say, I owe many people an explanation for my vote on the cloture motion on LB 753 that took place last week. In short, I voted wrong, and I apologize. You know, I tell my staff, and
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, folks that work in our company, if you mess up, fess up. And that's all you have to do. And I have to say, as the body quickly proceeded throughout the evening to cloture motion and advancement of the bill, and in my own haste and fatigue, I voted yes for cloture when my intention all along had been to vote no. And I even told that to the Catholic Chancery. I was going to vote yes for the amendment, but no on the bill. And I do not support LB 753 and believe strongly that public tax dollars should be used to support public schools. I know that this has created a lot of concern and confusion. And again, I am sincerely sorry to those who felt disappointed in my action. Additionally, I apologize to anyone who was given a false sense of hope that I support LB 753. I cannot support legislation that will in any way take public funding away from public schools. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to close on the motion to reconsider.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just have to get logged back into my computer. So I think we have 24 minutes left on this bill. So I'm not going to do motions to reconsider on the next two. Okay, I was reading from proper monitoring and controls. Oh, we already did that. Nope. The interim. Sorry, I keep accidentally going back and forth between the interim report and the 2014 audit report. Rainy day and carryover funding. States may use the unused TANF balance in subsequent years to carry over balance. The carryover balance could only be used for ADC payments in the past, but that restriction has been lifted. The carryover funds are also referred to as rainy day funds. Nebraska has had a carryover balance since the start of the TANF block grant. The block grant amount was determined using the base year of 1994 when public assistance caseloads in Nebraska and all states were at an all-time high. As welfare reform measures were implemented, caseloads declined significantly. Cash assistance covered approximately 15,000 families in 1994, and as of August 2022, 2,787 families were receiving cash assistance. The following chart shows annual TANF balance projections as prepared by the Department of Health and Human Services. So TANF available September 30th, 2021, 108 million. TANF grant award, 56 million. Estimated expenditures, 54 million. Then that brings us to a balance of 110 million. And then FY23 grant expenditures, 56 million. Estimated expenditures, negative 70 million. Coming from our unobligated funds of 110, that brings us to 96 million in the rainy day. And it goes on from there and takes us down eventually in 2028 to 4.6 million in the rainy day fund. So the estimate of annual grant expenditures, list programs. That's the end of the report. So that might sound like, oh, great, the TANF block grant, like the expenditures that they're estimating is going to spend down the rainy day fund. They have literally been giving us this since my freshman year. And I'm pretty sure they've been giving this since pretty much 2014. And they have not spent down the grant funds that are in the rainy day fund. And so I think it really is time to change the eligibility. Because right now the eligibility is under 50% of poverty. So again, in order to be eligible for the rainy day fund, for the direct cash assistance, aid to dependent children, you have to make under, well, it's $881 plus 71 because you have to have one child for the aid to dependent children. So $881 plus 71.
1 minute.
Thank you. 881 plus 71 is $952. Still less than we make a month. Take that times 12, and we are talking, you have to make $11,424 or less to get the aid to dependent children cash assistance. That is, and it's $71 for each additional child. You can make $71 more for each additional child. We have not increased the eligibility for this program in decades. And we have 3 bills that address this issue in various ways. All of them would be very impactful to people living in poverty. And I am asking colleagues that we find a way to get that move forward this year. This bill could be a vehicle for that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Members, the question is the motion to reconsider. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
0 ayes, 29 nays, Mr. President, on the motion to reconsider.
The motion fails. Mr. Clerk, for the next item.
Mr. President, next item, FA 49. It's the 5th division of AM 1337, consisting of section 64, which contains the contents of LB 611 as amended by the committee amendments.
Senator Hansen, you're recognized to open on floor amendment 49.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, this floor amendment FA 49 consists of LB 611, which is introduced by Senator Riepe. It changes medication requirements of the administration of drugs for a hospital, an ambulatory surgical center, or healthcare practitioner facility. When a provided medication is ordered at least 24 hours in advance for surgical procedures and is administered to a patient, any unused portion of the medication shall be offered to the patient upon discharge when it is required for continuing treatment. The prescriber is responsible for counseling the patient on its proper use and administration. The unused portion of such medication shall be labeled by the prescriber or a pharmacist consistent with the current labeling requirements. LB 611 as amended was advanced to General File 7.0. And that is, again, one of the divisible bills that we're going to be discussing here as a part of the assortment of bills. With that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let's see here. Okay. Oh, I finished. I finished reading the TANF interim study report. Okay, so I'm going to close that so I don't keep getting confused about where I'm at. I still have the TANF audit report from 2014. Let's see here. As mentioned previously, Nebraska's ADC Cash Assistance Program provides monthly cash assistance to those who have dependent children and fall within the income and resource limitations. In order to determine if the case is selected for testing met the ADC requirements, including income and resource limitations, the APA performed a detailed review of each case. Many components can affect eligibility, so the APA focused primarily on ensuring that the cases were needy by considering the income. Just thinking, I think there's one more after this. Floor Amendment 50, let me see. Let's see here. We are on floor amendment 49. So if you go to the UniNet, you can, on the right-hand side, there's like a tab. This is for my colleagues, not for people at home. If you go to the UniNet, on the right-hand side, it has amendments proposed by priority. And if you click on view details, because sometimes it's hard for me to figure out, so I just click on details. And then it has up top what is like the next priority. And it looks like we have 2 more divisions. So I am going to sit down so that we can vote on those. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. See no one else in the queue. Senator Hansen, you're recognized to close on floor amendment 49 and waives closing. Members, the question is the adoption of FA 49. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
34 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of FA 49.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for next item.
Mr. President, the next item, FA 50, it's the 6th division of AM 1332 in section 63, containing the contents of Legislative Bill 402 as amended by the committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Hansen, you're recognized to open on FA 50.
Thank you, Mr. President. FA 50 is the portion LB 402 in the block of bills. And that is Senator Ballard's bill, which defines home health agency that does not include a person or legal entity which engages only in social work practice. LB 402, as amended, was advanced to general file with a 7-0 vote. So with that, I'll yield the rest of my time back to the chair. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you. Got chopped. I think that there's more pending. So, and no, there's not more pending. There is more pending. Yes. Okay. I am going to yield my time. Thank you.
Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Hansen, you're recognized to close on the floor amendment and waives. Members, the question is the adoption of FA 50. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
36 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of FA 50.
The amendment is adopted. Senator McKinney has some guests in the north balcony, OPS students visiting the Capitol with Voices for Children in Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, for the next item.
Mr. President, next item, FA 51. It's the 7th division of AM 1337, consisting of sections 65 and 66, containing the contents of Legislative Bill 458.
Senator Hansen, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you again, Mr. President. I'm starting to think Senator Michaela Cavanaugh enjoys hearing my voice because he's making me repeat myself with all these bills. And then she doesn't talk after that, so it's all good. All right. This is FA 51, again, which is the portion of the package of bills that includes LB 458. I believe it's 458. That's Senator Ballard's bill, which provides that if the dispensing and central fill pharmacy are under common ownership, the fill pharmacy can deliver to the patient on behalf of the dispensing pharmacy. LB 458 was advanced to general file with a 7-0 vote. And I would encourage everyone to vote green on FA. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, of course, I do enjoy hearing Senator Ben Hansen speak, and even more so when it means I don't have to. But you have a lovely voice, and I'm happy to hear you speak on this fine Monday morning. I think we are just about at cloture, so I'm really just now taking time for cloture. I hope everyone had a lovely weekend. It was a bit chilly in Omaha. Didn't do too much myself. Hung out with my kids. Saw the movie Mario Brothers or Mario Kart. My youngest did not go, which ended up being really good because it had some scary parts to it that were not probably a 4-year-old, or at least my 4-year-old would have been scared by. But the soundtrack excellent. Some great like 80s ballads in there, reminiscent of Frozen 2. For those of you that have seen that movie, also great soundtrack with some great 80 ballads in it. So, yeah, that was kind of my weekend. I didn't get as much yard work done as I had hoped because it was kind of cold and I was really tired. I did get my oldest kid to help me with the hosta. I've been meaning to separate my hosta. Hosta is a great plant because it's really hardy. It's hard to kill. It grows back itself every year. And years ago when we bought our house, I got hosta from my parents' house. Never buy hosta. If you have to buy hosta, you don't have friends. Because everybody has hosta, and hosta is the easiest thing to divide and replant. And so my sedum and my hosta are from my parents' house. Super hardy, lovely plants. The sedum are a great pollinator plant. That is, we always have some really lovely bumblebees flying around our sedum. I'd like to have more of a pollinator garden. I think, did I just get a thumbs up? No? Yes? Okay, great. Well, I'll talk more about the garden maybe at 10 o'clock tonight. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on your desk.
I do, Mr. President. Senator Hansen would move to invoke cloture on LB 227 pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
Senator Hansen, for what purpose do you rise?
Call the House.
There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
28 ayes, 4 nays, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. All those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. Members, the first vote is the motion to invoke cloture. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
44 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, to invoke cloture.
The motion to invoke cloture is adopted. There's been a request for a roll call vote, and the question is the adoption of AM 1332. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar, voting yes. Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, voting yes. Senator Boston, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, Senator John Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, voting yes. Senator Day, Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator Dover, voting yes. Senator Dungan, voting yes. Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Holleran, voting yes. Senator Hansen, voting yes. Senator Hardin, voting yes. Senator Holcroft, voting yes. Senator Hughes, voting yes. Senator Hunt, Senator Ibach, voting yes. Senator Jacobson, voting yes. Senator Kauth, voting yes. Senator Linehan, voting yes. Senator Lippincott, voting yes. Senator Lowe, voting yes. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McKinney, Senator Mosier, voting yes. Senator Merman, voting yes. Senator Raybold, voting yes. Senator Reapy, voting yes. Senator Sanders, voting yes. Senator Slama, voting yes. Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Von Gillern, voting yes. Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Wayne, voting yes. Senator Wishart, voting yes. Vote is 45 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of AM 1332.
The amendment is adopted. Members, the next vote is on the adoption of AM 848. All those in favor vote aye. All the request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar, voting yes. Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, voting yes. Senator Boston, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, Senator John Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, voting yes. Senator Day, Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator Dover, voting yes. Senator Dungan, voting yes. Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Holleran, voting yes. Senator Hansen, voting yes. Senator Hansen, voting yes. Senator Hardin, voting yes. Senator Holcroft, voting yes. Senator Hughes, voting yes. Senator Hunt, Senator Ibach, voting yes. Senator Jacobson, voting yes. Senator Kauth, voting yes. Senator Linehan, voting yes. Senator Lippincott, voting yes. Senator Lowe, voting yes. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McKinney, Senator Mosier, voting yes. Senator Merman, voting yes. Senator Raybold, voting yes. Senator Reapy, voting yes. Senator Sanders, voting yes. Senator Slama, voting yes. Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Von Gillern, voting yes. Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Wayne, voting yes. Senator Wishart, voting yes. Vote is 45 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of the committee amendment.
AM 848 is adopted. Members, the next question is the advancement of LB 227 to ENR initial. The request for a roll call vote.
Senator Aguilar, voting yes. Senator Albright, voting yes. Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, voting yes. Senator Boston, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, Senator John Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, Voting yes, Senator Day. Senator DeBoer. Voting yes, Senator DeKay. Voting yes, Senator Dorn. Voting yes, Senator Dover. Voting yes, Senator Dungan. Voting yes, Senator Erdman. Voting yes, Senator Frederickson. Voting yes, Senator Holleran. Voting yes, Senator Hansen. Voting yes, Senator Hardin. Voting yes, Senator Holdcroft. Voting yes, Senator Hughes. Voting yes, Senator Hunt. Senator Ibach. Voting yes, Senator Jacobson. Voting yes, Senator Kauth. Voting yes, Senator Linehan. Voting yes, Senator Lippincott. Voting yes, Senator Lowe. Voting yes, Senator McDonald. Voting yes, Senator McKinney. Senator Mosier. Voting yes, Senator Merman. Voting yes, Senator Raybold. Voting yes, Senator Reapy. Voting yes, Senator Sanders. Voting yes, Senator Slama. Voting yes, Senator Vargas. Voting yes, Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes, Senator Walls. Voting yes, Senator Wayne. Voting yes, Senator Wishart. Voting yes. Vote is 45 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on advancement of the bill.
LB 227 advances to E&R initial. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk for items.
Thank you, Mr. President. Amendments to be printed, Senator Bostelman to LB 565. New LR from Senator Lowe, LR 97. Those will both, and 98, those will both be referred to the executive board. Next item on the agenda, Mr. President, Legislative Bill 254, introduced by Senator Brewer. It's a bill for an act relating to the legislature, amend sections 50, 114, 5402, 79, 1312, 1313, and 1316. Requires the Legislative Council through the Executive Board of the Legislative Council to develop and maintain a publicly accessible digital internet archive of closed caption video coverage the legislature has prescribed, change provisions of the Nebraska Educational Telecommunications Act, change powers and duties of the Nebraska Educational Telecommunications Commission, harmonize provisions, which provides a duty for the revise their statutes, repeals the original section. Bill was read for the first time on January 10th of this year, referred to the Executive Board. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments. Mr. President, when the legislature left the bill, committee amendments were pending, as well as a bracket motion from Senator Michaela Cavanaugh.
Senator Brewer, you are recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Refresh, I should say.
Refresh, yes, and I will keep it short. Again, this came out of committee 8-0. It's prioritized by the exec board. LB 254 is simply a digital library, a public accessible online archive, video recordings of floor debate and of committee hearings. Just as a reminder too, the video archive will be created and will belong to the executive board of the Legislative Council and will be administered by the clerk of the legislature. With that, I will ask for your support on LB 254. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brewer. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, so this is the motion to bracket until June 1st. And when we last had this bill up, I think it was last week at some point, I said that I was unsure about how I was going to vote for the bill. And I think that I am probably going to be in support of the bill. I appreciate any opportunity and strides that this body takes to improve government oversight and transparency. Having a digital library of our hearings available, I think, is a good step in that direction. My hesitation only comes from not fully knowing the ins and outs of the mechanisms for all of this. And of course, as always, concerned about staff time and how this is going to impact the staff, because this does seem like a pretty large undertaking. And I'm assuming it would go to the clerk's office. So hopefully we are making accommodations for staffing needs if that's the case. But I do welcome that we are giving the public a greater opportunity to see our public proceedings and to make them more easily accessible. One thing I have found with public hearings outside of the legislature, specifically with the Omaha City Council, is it's hard to find, or maybe it's just hard for me to find, but it's hard to find the hearings online. And then if you do find them, it's hard to find them later. And of course, our hearings are hard to find later because they're streamed live, but there have been outside groups that have started streaming them and archiving them themselves on YouTube and Facebook. And I've utilized those resources when I've missed a hearing within the legislature that I wanted to see on a bill that I really wanted to see. I have gone to an outside group's YouTube or Facebook page to find the video recording to see the conversations that I missed. Yeah, so I think inherently this feels like a really good bill and a really good move. One of my concerns with this, and it's not a significant concern, but it is a concern of how our proceedings are used for political purposes. But I guess we all use them for political purposes anyways, so this just makes it an official record that, I mean, we're still going to see, even if we didn't enact this, we would still see clips of digital footage from committee hearings or floor debate on campaign ads, whether they're supporting ads or attack ads. We're going to see that regardless of if this bill passes. So maybe this bill passing changes the utilization of that a bit. I wonder if Senator Brewer would yield to a question. I'm going to ask the question before I ask you to yield. So the question is going to be, if we do this, will it then require any usage of our footage to be licensed so people can't pirate it off of and splice it how they want for like campaign commercials?
Senator Brewer, would you yield to a question?
And maybe you don't know the answer. That's okay too.
Yes. To answer your question, it will be the property of the
1
exec
minute.
board. And so obviously with their property, then you would have to, request, I mean, just like you would anything that was the ownership of someone else. So when we were designing the bill, the issue you brought up earlier was a concern too, as far as the amount of time it would take to prep this. But because we're going through a digital process, it's much quicker and cleaner in order to take it from live to in the digital library.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I might have some further questions that I can ask legal counsel over our lunch break. Very brief, not to take up their lunch hour, but very brief questions. Again, always want to be mindful of staff time. And when we have a lunch break, it's also their lunch break.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do I just have this time and then a close? Or do I have two, this time and another time and a close?
One more time plus close.
Okay, great. Okay, so LB 254 is the digital library, and actually interested in who attended the hearing. And I do always, whenever I ask questions on the mic, they're normally, because I've just thought of something as I'm talking. If I don't ask you in advance, it's because I just thought of it as I was talking. And I'm a curious person. This happens to me a lot. And so I try to tell the question so that you can be prepared to say, I'll get back to you with that answer. Or not accept answering the question, but I just like people to know that I am trying to ask questions to, I guess, assuage my own curiosity. Okay, so I'm looking up the hearing itself, and I wanted to see who was in support: the Platt Institute, Nebraska Civic Engagement Table, Media of Nebraska, Civic Nebraska, Common Cause Nebraska, and the Legislative Study Group. And then neutral was the clerk of the legislature. I've never seen the clerk testify anything other than neutral. So I am kind of curious, was it a neutral positive? Was it a neutral negative? Or was it actually a neutral neutral? They're indicating that they believe it was a neutral neutral. I do like that the clerk testifies in neutral, because the neutral position, whether it's the clerk or a state agency, really, that's what the neutral position is for those entities to come in and tell us the feasibility of what we are attempting to do, or the practicality of what we are attempting to do. We've had this issue a lot with state agencies, and I think this has been across committees. I think this has been a frustration across committees. I know it has been a frustration in HHS across years, is having the state agency come and testify in opposition to our bills, when in reality, they should be testifying neutral, and their role in testifying is to come and inform the committee that the bill is in front of how the bill would function in practicality, or how it would not function in practicality. And that is how we get better policy. Having a state agency come and testify in opposition to a bill because the governor's office is philosophically opposed to the bill is not appropriate. The governor's office can come and testify in opposition to a bill for that reason, but it really diminishes the relationship with the legislature when state agencies come and testify in that capacity, because we should be looking at them as a partner and a resource. So when a bill comes in front of HHS and they testify in opposition, well, and the committee and maybe the entire legislature is in unanimous support of moving forward, whatever that legislation is, we are now in the position of, okay, but you opposed it for a philosophical reason. But is it practical? If we are going to pass this piece of legislation, regardless of your feelings about it on its merits, does it function? And if not, how can we write it and redraft it so that it will function? And that is a disconnect that I have seen over the last several years. I'll get back in the queue. I have seen over the last several years is that we aren't doing legislation appropriately for it to function when we have agencies not partnering with us. That is problematic. I think Senator Wayne had a bill. I don't know if he had it this year. I know he's brought it previous years to require state agencies to only testify neutral. I saw him walk through here a moment ago. So I might ask him over the lunch break about that. And I see them discussing something up front that maybe I don't have another time in the queue, and it's my closing. I do have another time in the queue. I'm in the queue regardless. I figure you'll tell me if I have to stop talking. So
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And Senator Kavanaugh, you're now recognized for your close on the bracket.
Fantastic. Okay, so this is my last time in the queue, my close, etc. Yeah, so having state agencies come and testify in opposition or even in support of a bill is not really the function. That's not how it should be working. What we should be seeing from state agencies is that they come and they testify in neutral on the mechanics of the bill, that they come and they tell us, if you implement this bill as written, it has flaws and we believe it needs to have these changes, and also come with proposed language changes. That is really, really helpful. When we passed my bill, the family support waiver, there were some fundamental things within the bill that needed to be changed so that it worked. And the agency came in opposition to the bill, but not because of those reasons. They came in opposition to the bill because the governor opposed new programs. This was the previous governor, opposed new programs and didn't want to see that bill move forward. That is a problem. And we had to find a way through that problem because this body wanted to pass that bill. It was like 44 senators voted for it. And Speaker Arch used the committee priority for it. People in this body wanted to pass that bill. And so we as a body and as a committee had to find a path forward through the agency's opposition to the premise of the program. We were able to. I think it would have been much cleaner, expedient if we had started at that place, if we had started at the place of, if we do this, how should it work? And sometimes we ask that question, if we do this, agency X, how will it work in practicality? And then we end up not doing it because we come to make the decision ourselves, as is our job and our purview, that we're not going to move a piece of legislation forward. But it is not the job and the purview of state agencies to tell us that. It is their job to help us create policies that they can then implement and to create them in a way in which they can then implement them. I've seen a mix of that this year with the new administration. Some of the sort of old tendencies of coming in opposition and not really working on strong public policies. But I've also seen an improvement of showing up and having the conversation and partnering with various senators to strengthen the legislation. I hope that we move more in the direction of strengthening the policy and the conversation, because I do think that we all benefit from that. We all benefit from that bipartisan or nonpartisan work. Really, it shouldn't be bipartisan when we're talking about working with state agencies. These are civil servants. It should be nonpartisan. This nonpartisan opportunity to create strong public policy. And when we do that, when we all partner together, that's when we really see some great things happen in our state. And so I hope that as the years go on in this administration, that we continue to see the departments, the state agencies show up in a neutral capacity.
That's your time. Oh, excuse me, 1 minute, one minute.
That's all right. Show up in a neutral capacity so that we can start building a partnership relationship with the state agencies. It feels like the last 8 years were much more adversarial than was probably healthy or productive. And so I do hope to see more of that partnership attitude when working on public policy for the betterment of the people of Nebraska. I have a whole nother thing to say about fiscal notes and how that plays into this conversation as well. But probably I will entertain you all with my fiscal note analysis after the lunch break. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like a call of the House and a roll call vote.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
17 ayes, 6 nays, Mr. President, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Kavanaugh, may we proceed? And I understand you're requesting a machine vote.
Yes, thank you.
The question before the body is to bracket the bill. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
0 ayes, 36 nays, Mr. President, to bracket LB 254.
The bracket motion fails. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, motion to be printed.
The call's raised. Raise the call.
Mr. President, motion to be printed, or excuse me, amendment to be printed to LB 256 from Senator Kavanaugh. Notice that the Government Committee will hold an executive session today at noon in room 1507, executive session government today, room 1507 at noon. And the Revenue Committee will be holding an executive session at 1 o'clock under the South Balcony. Revenue Committee, 1 o'clock, South Balcony. Finally, Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Albright moved to recess the body until 1 o'clock p.m.
Senators, you've heard the question to adjourn or recess. All those in favor vote aye. State aye. All those opposed, nay. We are in recess.